4. This week we're going to continue our focus on situating creativity, specifically focusing on finding creative inspiration. In this video, I want to talk a bit about inquiry and invention, and then I'll introduce our week 4 readings, cases, and sparks. Last week, I shared 3 questions and the inquiry processes that led to, first, the development of Gatorade, second, innovating common household products and the creation of Swiffer, and to a group of researchers wondering how people's tendency to overshare on social media might help us pinpoint outbreaks of foodborne illness. I want to share another context for inquiry, but from a different perspective, and connect inquiry to creative inspiration. My PhD is from Michigan Technological University, which is about 8 hours north in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. This is a photo I took on my street the first year I lived up there. One of my favorite times of year was Winter Carnival, held in February on campus and through town since 1922. Each year had a theme, and student groups create a sculpture based on that theme using only snow and ice. What are you going to do in the midst of a long, cold winter when literally tons of snow is piling up and it doesn't melt, and you need to do something with it other than dump it onto the frozen Lake Superior? You have a carnival and you build snow sculptures. Here's a photo of a snow sculpture from a winter carnival in the 1980s, and one from when the theme was a frozen commotion from the depths of the ocean. From 2007, when the theme was ancient worlds and modern day. And from 2008, and you can see the amazing detail in the ice prison they created to hold their snow and ice werewolf. Last year's theme was Discover What Shines from Prehistoric Times, and this was one of the award-winning sculptures. This year will be different, like all things in the latter half of 2020 and in a pandemic context, but snow will still fall and carnival will still happen. This year's theme is our favorite cartoons for snowy afternoons. I'm curious to see what people will build this year. Again, created completely with snow, water, and ice. I share this all because I think it resonates well with this week's focus on finding creative inspiration. Students go through extensive processes of researching the year's theme, identifying what sort of concept they want to articulate through their sculpture. They have to research weather conditions and monitor the temperature carefully. They have to research the weight of snow and how it would change based on additional snowfall and temperature. Their engineering sketches are essentially architectural drawings that also consider height, span, support, and many, many other considerations. Their work involves creative inspiration through research that spans from history and culture to engineering, architecture, meteorology, and more. Up at Michigan Tech, I studied rhetoric and technical communication, and in our culture, rhetoric generally has a bad reputation. We hear people add adjectives like empty, or rhetoric is associated with tricking people. However, rhetoric is a pretty powerful tool for communicators. Otto Aces and Ellen Lupton, 2 design scholars, define rhetoric first by drawing on Aristotle, who saw rhetoric as the ability to select among and apply different means of persuasion. When Aristotle talked about rhetoric, he was talking about guys in ancient Greece delivering orations out in a public square. Aces and Lupton jumped to the present by arguing that rhetoric is a set of tools that we can revise and remix to help us communicate across modes and media in our contemporary lives. I mentioned this in class last week. You can have the best idea in the world as an entrepreneur, a supply chain management student, an advertising student, a writing student. If you can't communicate that idea is going nowhere. To communicate ideas, you first have to understand rhetorical considerations, which include the context in which your ideas are going to be experienced, seen, or read. Purpose, or what your communication is meant to do. And most importantly, audience, or those you want to reach. The ancient rhetorical canons that help guide communication processes are invention, arrangement, style, and delivery, presented here more traditionally and historically, and then rescripted and remixed as communication tools for today. And I want to talk specifically a bit about invention, because it's a key part of the creative process. We're going to talk more about creative processes later in class, but for right now, I want to share some examples of engaging in research to find creative inspiration. As I mentioned last week, research isn't just something you do in school, and it doesn't just happen in academic databases or at the library. Research is something you'll do the rest of your life. Every time you approach a new task at work, get assigned a new role, seek out a new job, you'll do research. And research is key to creative inspiration. And by this, I mean that creative inspiration doesn't just happen magically. We have to engage in processes that creatively inspire us. Looking for examples, talking to others, drafting and prototyping materials, and more. So with inspiration in mind, I want to share with you a couple of examples of creative inspiration. One of my favorite sources of creative inspiration is Ze Frank. If you haven't seen his True Facts series on YouTube, you definitely have to check it out. Here's one of his older pieces, an instructional video.
In our personal and professional lives, sometimes we receive emails that are upsetting, like this one I received last week. Dear Zay, regarding the designs you sent, it was a good first attempt. However, your use of color and typography feels a bit childish and out of date. We'd like you to meet with our in-house designer so we can educate you on our design philosophy and show you some better alternatives he's come up with. Alex. Now, my first instinct is to respond like this. Dear Alex, please tell your in-house designer to shove his alternatives up your... I don't end up sending these emails. In fact, I send something quite different. Something like this. Alex, of course I'm perfectly willing to accommodate any changes. Let's set up a meeting with your designer ASAP. I'm sure we'll be able to figure something out. How does that sound? I look forward to working with you on this. Zay. Now this bottles up a lot of anger, and eventually we take it out on the things we love, like our cell phones or our digital cameras. But there's an alternative. It's called punctuation substitution. As you can see, by associating punctuation with simple phrases, you greatly increase the vocabulary at your disposal. Returning to the email we just saw, it now reads, Alex, you vacuous pussbag. Of course I'm perfectly willing to accommodate any changes, you minuscule twit. Let's set up a meeting with your designer ASAP, or not. I'm sure we'll be able to figure something out, or not. How does that sound, idiot boy? I look forward to working with you on this piece of crap. Zay. Bite me, jackass.
I love this for the content. It's hilarious and smart, but I also really like this because the way he split the screen and used himself to point toward his email. I thought that was particularly innovative. I found this piece years ago when I was researching how to best deliver a presentation I wasn't going to be present for. This was before YouTube was around. And I planned to burn a CD for participants, but I didn't just want a CD with a generic PowerPoint on it. So I borrowed Zay's approach in a video I created using some of the same techniques.
Hello DMACers, I'm Danielle Nicole DeVoss from Michigan State University, and I'm sorry I can't be with you for the workshop, but I wanted to share some materials with you. So, first, the arguments. More and more, we're asking students to move away from the double...
A student in a document design class I teach is another great example of creative inspiration. He ran role-playing games with his groups of friends, and the game they played was set in the 1920s. He wanted to have some documents that would be part of the game he was setting up, but he wasn't sure what CIA documents looked like back before computers, when everything was handwritten or typed. So he researched and gathered classified, top secret, and confidential historical CIA and FBI documents for models to use to create his own game-playing documents. Another student I worked with wanted to create an identity marker, essentially a personal logo, to brand his professional portfolio. He wanted people to associate him with a concept of logos, or logic, and did a search for logos that play on the idea of logic. One final example of creative inspiration. This is a student who was working on the design of her honors senior thesis, which was a collection of short stories she'd written. She went to Amazon and searched for collections of stories on similar topics to hers, gathered covers, and based her cover design for her senior thesis on the elements she liked the most. What I want to emphasize here about finding creative inspiration is that all of these projects involved research. I think sometimes we see research as something we only do in school, but you'll research again your entire career and your entire life. An invention, which is, I think, fueled and facilitated by research, doesn't just happen in a library, and it doesn't just happen at the start of a project. We invent across all phases of a project. One of our readings for this week is a set of excerpts from a book called Inspiration Equals Ideas, for which the author shows some professionals, specifically graphic designers, and asks them how they invent, how they find inspiration in their everyday lives and work. And you'll see in this reading that research happens between people, in the context of technological change, and across different digital spaces. Think of Pinterest, for instance, which I would argue is a sort of research-oriented space. Research happens across media and in the context of specific theories and cultural histories, and invention and inspiration can be found all over the place. I encourage students to be human satellite dishes. That is, don't just shuffle through the world. Pay close attention to the information feeds around you. Listen to people. Watch how they interact and behave. Look at posters, flyers, advertisements. Engage the world. Don't just walk through it. Pull in the feed and apply it to the questions, situations, and context for which you're building, designing, writing, and creating. I hope that invention and inquiry as part of research processes and finding creative inspiration is useful and helpful and interesting to you. This week, all of our readings have to do with finding creative inspiration. The first reading is a chapter called Innovation Begins with an I. It's by the brother of the founder of IDEO, of writing alongside with Jonathan Littman. And they talk about IDEO's internal process for finding creative inspiration and nurturing creative inspiration. And they argue that it starts with observation as part of the research process. The second reading is from a book I just mentioned, Inspiration Equals Ideas. For the book, the author sought out creative professionals and asked them where they found inspiration. The lists and the examples are really interesting. We have one creativity case for this week, and it's a list of 9 interviews with creative visionaries. You don't have to read all 9. Take a look at the 9, choose one that interests you, and then read that one in depth. We have 2 creativity sparks. The first is a television show, video, documentary. I'm not entirely sure what it is, but it's called Powers of 10. It was produced in the 1970s, and it's a fantastic look at the ways in which perspective shapes how we see, how we look, and how we interpret the world around us. The second creativity spark is a wedding announcement, which might seem an odd choice for a university class, but I love this as a case of creativity. The piece shows an incredible ability to tell story, to use graphics, to integrate design elements, to code HTML and CSS and more. It's a really, really interesting example. I've gone back to this wedding announcement several times as an inspiration source. A few years ago, specifically, I was working on the invite to our department's end of the year reception for undergrads, and I remember seeing an animated keyboard, and then I started drafting and playing with a keyboard as a main image for our invite. And this is what the final invite looked like. Just a reminder, Packback participation is a key part of class. It's worth 300 points towards your final grade. For 10 weeks of our class, you'll want to participate on Packback. Participating in a week means posting one question, ideally inspired by our readings, our cases, our sparks, or our class topics more generally, and then responding to one question that someone else has posted. For each week you choose to participate, your question and your response should be posted by midnight of that Sunday. So for instance, this is week 4. Your Packback participation is due by midnight Eastern this Sunday, February 7th. So get it done before you watch the Super Bowl. I shared the class work checklist with you and it's posted on D2L. I think that's a helpful tool for staying on top of the weekly work of this class. For this week, it's watching this video, spending some time with the week for readings, case, and sparks, posting to Packback, and continuing to work on Creativity Quest 1. And as always, if you have any questions about this week or about class in general, feel free to text me or email me.